What can you do better and faster?
Well, first of all, let's put this in perspective. Inflation rate month to month was just an inch, hardly at all.
You're not arguing that 8.3 is good news.
No, I'm not saying it is good news, but it was 8.2 or 8.2 before. I mean, it's not, I can make it sound like all of a sudden, my God, it went to 8.2%.
President Biden is not in an optimal situation when it comes to the American economy, particularly when it comes to inflation. After all, since 2021, monthly inflation has ranged from 2.6% to 9.1%, and the annual inflation rate back in 2022 was a whopping 8.3%. P.S. Inflation is the rise in the general level of prices. Fortunately for America, in the last few months, inflation has been cooling down to roughly 3%. But before this, a bill to reduce inflation, an act if you will, was proposed and enacted in 2022, called the Inflation Reduction Act. How creative. The act itself is a successor to Biden's previous proposal called Build Back Better, which failed to be enacted. The act has a lot of things like a 15% minimum corporate tax for companies, a 1% tax on stock buybacks, allowing Medicare to negotiate drug prices, limiting the increase in prices of some Medicare-covered drugs, extending the temporary expansion of Affordable Care Act subsidies through 2025, and various tax rebates and credits for a variety of green measures. With such lovely policies to reduce inflation, what sane person would oppose this? Apparently quite a few. For instance, when the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, the Lincoln Project whined about no Republicans voting for the bill, and President Biden had similar complaints since then. After all, Biden and his administration have achieved so much with the bill's provisions, while simultaneously cutting the deficit by a whopping $1.7 trillion. Oh wait, according to a Twitter fact check, experts say that the deficit fell in 2021 and 2022 mainly due to pandemic stimulus expiring, while Biden's own policies had a net negative effect on the stimulus. I thought only the other president got fact checked. P.S. I'm still not calling it X. Regardless, analyzing the deficit and Biden will be for another video. What is the reason that Republicans did not vote for the Inflation Reduction Act? Is it because they hate poor people, hate black people, hate women, want global warming, want Americans to not have healthcare? Oh, that's it. It's because they want more inflation. Why else would they oppose it? So how will Biden's bill reduce inflation? Well, one of the key ways that the Inflation Reduction Act will supposedly lower inflation will be through cutting the deficit. This is because a smaller deficit can cool aggregate demand, as in a lower deficit will discourage people from buying, and this will put less pressure on prices, mitigating inflation. According to the Penn-Wharton budget model, the spending and revenue provisions would reduce deficits by a cumulative $248 billion from 2022 to 2031, while the Congressional Budget Office estimated that the deficit would be reduced by $305 billion. Regardless, even the right-leaning Tax Foundation approximates a $224 billion cut in the deficit during the first decade. The difference between these three deficit estimates represents an extremely small portion of projected revenues, but the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget believes that the Inflation Reduction Act would have even better deficit reduction estimates than the other three, where potentially $30 billion in deficit reduction will occur within the first 2 years, and deficits would be reduced by over $300 billion in the first 9 years, as well as by $1.9 trillion over 2 decades. But if the Affordable Care Act subsidies are extended, then the bill will only reduce deficits by $1.1 trillion. Another provision of the Act is lowering prescription drug prices. As this will mean lower healthcare costs for workers, they will have less of a reason to push for higher wages. In a similar fashion, the energy provisions will also lower renewable energy costs, which will make it less likely that businesses pass these costs on to consumers. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget believe that these two outcomes will make wages and prices less likely to increase, which would lower inflation, which is why they believe the bill would have stronger deflationary effects than the other think tanks and studies. Hence, there appears to be a broad consensus amongst the think tanks that there will be large deficit reductions in terms of raw numbers. So Biden's bill should be able to make a sizable impact on inflation, right? Well, let's check their estimates. Penn-Wharton estimates that the Inflation Reduction Act would have a very modest impact on inflation over the next decade. From their analysis, the Act reduces annual inflation by 0.1% in about 5 years once the deficit reduction provisions are enacted, but then have no impact on inflation after 2028. These estimates aren't statistically different from zero.
I was going to the foothills of the Himalayas with Xi Jinping.
Wait, what? That can't be right. Well, we still have 3 other studies to check. Now, the CBO estimates show that the impact on inflation could be positive or negative, but any change would be too small to detect, with the impact still being statistically indistinguishable from zero. What? These think tanks must be MAGA propaganda. I wonder what the traitor Trump is paying them. Wait, the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget believes that the Inflation Reduction Act would have stronger deflationary effects due to faster inflation reduction estimates. Yes, a true think tank that supports Bidenomics. Now, they say that even these deflationary effects are likely to be modest.
More than half of the women in my administration are women.
Well, we still have one study to check, and it's from the conservative-leaning Tax Foundation. They posit that limiting productive capacity could actually worsen inflation via the higher tax proposals, and when they tackle the deflationary measures arising from deficit reduction, they are concerned that projected revenues may be lower than expected, or that revenue may take time to catch up with spending. For example, the history of the corporate alternative minimum tax suggests that the minimum corporate tax's revenues may decline. Scenarios like this are worsened by how budget deficits may increase from 2023 to 2026, which could exacerbate inflation.
Come on, man.
Overall, the consensus is clear. Whether inflation is increased or decreased due to the ironically titled Inflation Reduction Act, the effect will be statistically insignificant and undetectable because the deficit reduction, despite being large in raw numbers, would just make a small part of the federal debts and revenues. So it is unlikely the bill will reduce inflation. It will probably have a neutral effect. It's almost like the Inflation Reduction Act was just titled that way to be politically convenient to pass. Well, that's probably because it is. But before we continue, please feel free to give a like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video so far. Now, apparently Joe Biden regrets naming it the Inflation Reduction Act because it, quote-unquote, has less to do with reducing inflation than it has to do with providing alternatives that generate economic growth, according to the president himself at a Utah fundraiser. Well, this sounds like cope. Ooh, the main point of the bill was not to reduce inflation, and I just slapped a politically convenient title on it. Maybe we should start calling him President Cope Biden. But what about inflation, falling from 9% to 3.2% from 2022 to 2023? Surely the act contributed to this. Well, not according to economists. Experts pointed to 3 reasons not related to the Inflation Reduction Act. Inflation has drastically fallen because gas prices have fallen and that the Federal Reserve have dramatically raised interest rates, which has made it more expensive to borrow and slowed demand. After all, they have nearly doubled mortgage rates, which has slowed home sales. Also, some supply chain problems that caused shortages has now fallen even below pre-pandemic levels, such as shipping costs having declined. Of course, there are apparent positives to the bill that I hinted to before, like tax credits reducing costs of solar panel rooftops and electric vehicles, and limiting drug prices, as well as the act potentially stimulating roughly $500 billion in corporate announcements to invest in new factories. But it is clear that the bill will not meaningfully cut inflation. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed this video. This video is the first in a series of videos called Debunking Bidenomics, where I critique the economic policies and ideas of President Biden and his administration. This will include whether he actually reduced the deficit and his ideas on stock buybacks and windfall taxes. I am also doing a parallel series analysing the Inflation Reduction Act, and I've already done 2 videos on it. You can check those in my channel, and I will also analyse the green energy provisions, and hopefully the minimum corporate tax. Anyways, if you liked my video, please comment and give a like since it really helps me in the YouTube algorithm, and subscribe to check out more of my videos. I am hoping to get to 500 subscribers by this Friday, since by that time I will have been doing YouTube for 4 years. Thanks for watching and see you later. Bye.